I always liked mornings at the office. There was something almost comforting about the rhythm of it all. The quiet hum of the coffee machine, the way sunlight slanted through the blinds onto the polished floor, and the faint scent of paper and printer ink lingering in the air. I'd grab my usual cup, black, no sugar, and take a moment just to watch everything wake up around me. It was ordinary, simple, and for some reason, I loved it that I'd nod at the same few people at the entrance, exchange a couple of jokes that barely scratched the surface of real laughter, but it was enough. Enough to feel connected. Enough to feel like I was part of something that mattered, even in the small, unnoticed ways. Sitting at my desk, I could hear the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, the occasional chuckle from the break room, the quiet shuffle of papers. This was my zone, predictable, stable, my little island of normalcy. People whispered about cost-cutting now and then, of course. HR emails, rumors floating through meetings, the kind of murmurs that could make a person nervous if they let them. But I never worried. Not really. I'd been here long enough to know my worth, or so I thought. They'll never touch me, I'd tell myself, sipping the bitter warmth of my coffee, letting it anchor me in the morning calm. There was something almost meditative about starting the day like this. I'd glance around, watch my coworkers settle into their routines, see someone nervously scrolling through emails, someone else humming along to a podcast only they could hear. The office smelled faintly of coffee and ambition, the air tinged with the quiet promise of tasks that needed attention but weren't urgent. It was a world where I knew the rules, where I understood my role, where I felt safe that I remember thinking once, maybe a little smugly, that I could ride this wave for a long time. I had the experience, the know-how, and, importantly, the operating license that nobody else had. In my mind, I was untouchable. The whispers of cost-cutting were just background noise, like the hum of fluorescent lights above, present, but easy to ignore. And so, I sat there, sipping my coffee, tapping keys, feeling the small satisfaction of a day that had barely begun but already felt under my control. I had no idea how fragile that sense of stability really was, how easily it could shatter in a single conversation. In a few words I wasn't ready to hear, IT started small. At first, I brushed it off, an email here, a meeting there, but slowly, the rhythm of the office began to feel off. There was a tension in the air I couldn't name, like a storm rolling over the horizon that you can see in the distance but can't quite feel why ET.H or started calling me into brief meetings with no clear agenda. Just touch base, they'd say, and I'd nod, smiling politely, while my stomach twisted in a quiet, anxious knot. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a glance that lingered too long, a question phrased a little too carefully, a paused breath before a casual comment. I'd sit there, pretending to understand, pretending to be calm, but inside, my mind was a carousel of possibilities I didn't want to face. I remember walking past the break room one morning. Two colleagues were whispering, glancing my way. I caught fragments of words: budget, cutbacks, restructuring. My heart skipped, but I tried to laugh it off in my head. They're just talking, I told myself. It's nothing personal. You're safe. Still, the thought lingered like smoke that won't leave the room. Flashbacks started creeping in uninvited. I remembered the last round of layoffs, how one of my friends, someone I trusted, was let go without warning. The shock, the humiliation, the way they walked out clutching a box of their things, eyes wide, mouth moving but words failing. I shook my head, trying to push the memory away. Not me, I thought. Not now. Even my morning routine began to feel different. The coffee didn't taste the same. The sunlight felt harsher, the hum of keyboards louder, almost accusatory. I noticed the subtle glances of colleagues, their whispered conversations halting as I walked by. Every small sound seemed amplified: the tap of a mouse, the squeak of a rolling chair, the rustle of papers. It was as if the office had become a living, breathing organism, watching me, testing me, waiting for a reaction. And yet, I tried to cling to normalcy. I made a joke or two at my desk, laughed quietly at a meme, nodded at passing coworkers. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was imagining the tension. But deep down, the unease had sunk roots, a slow-growing fear that I couldn't shake. I was beginning to feel exposed, vulnerable, and, worse, ignored by the end of the day. I found myself staring at my reflection in the darkened computer screen. I barely recognized the person looking back. The calm, confident version of me, the one who sipped coffee and tapped keys with quiet assurance, was starting to feel fragile. For the first time, I realized that the world I thought I controlled might not be as solid as I believed. I'll never forget the moment it happened. The call to HR came mid-morning, pulling me from a spreadsheet that felt meaningless in that instant. "Can you come to my office for a quick chat?" The email said. Quick chat. Such a small phrase. For something that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. Walking down the hall, I felt the air thicken. My stomach knotted, my palms damp against the smooth edge of my desk as I pushed my chair back. Every step echoed in my ears, too loud, too real. I wanted to laugh at how absurd it felt, the dread, the overthinking, but there was nothing funny about the pit forming in my stomach. The door closed behind me with a finality that felt like a guillotine snapping shut. HR sat there, calm, professional. Their eyes didn't flicker. There was no preamble, no small talk, just the words I wasn't ready for. "We're going to have to let you go," they said, voice clipped, rehearsed. "It's part of a company-wide cost-cutting initiative." Time slowed. My mind screamed. My mouth didn't move. I stared, trying to process something that didn't make sense. Cost-cutting? Me? The one person who had kept operations running smoothly for years? The one with the license nobody else had? It felt like the world had shifted on its axis, leaving me spinning alone in a place that had once felt safe. Flashbacks hit me in waves. I remembered late nights fixing systems, the endless phone calls troubleshooting crises no one else understood. I remembered the pride in solving problems others couldn't, the small victories that nobody noticed but me. Every memory felt like evidence against the decision being made in front of me. And yet here I was, told that none of it mattered. My hands trembled. I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles whitened. The smell of office coffee, the faint hum of the air conditioning, even the sterile scent of HR's office, all of it became too much. My thoughts looped. "You're being ridiculous. They can't do this. They can't." And then I realized they could. They were. I had no choice in the matter. The finality of it sank into my chest, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to argue, to cry, to laugh bitterly, to run out the door, but I just sat there, caught in disbelief, trying to make the world match my understanding, trying to bend reality to my will for just one more second. By the time I walked out of that office, my belongings in a box, everything felt surreal. The usual office noises, keyboards clacking, phones ringing, murmured conversations, now sounded like they were happening in another universe. I had been unmoored, swept away by something I didn't see coming, by a decision that made no sense. Walking out of that office felt like moving through a fog. My box of belongings was heavy in my hands, but the weight inside me was heavier, an impossible mix of disbelief, humiliation, and raw frustration. Every step down the hallway echoed, bouncing back at me like a cruel reminder that nothing would ever be the same. I kept expecting someone, anyone, to stop me, to say, "Wait, we made a mistake," but no one did. Coworkers glanced briefly in my direction, awkward smiles, hesitant nods, and then looked away, as if they couldn't quite decide whether to pity me or avoid me entirely. I wondered how quickly rumors would spread, what they would think, what they might say about me once I was gone. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. The humming machinery sounded louder than usual, like it was mocking me. I gripped the metal, railing, fingers cold and slick with sweat, and tried to focus on anything besides the sense of being unmoored. The smell of coffee from the lobby wafted faintly up, familiar, but now somehow alien. It should have been comforting. It had always been comforting, but now it was just another layer of dissonance in a day that made no sense that I thought about. My accomplishments, the countless hours I'd invested, the crises I'd solved, and the countless small victories nobody had noticed. "Cost-cutting," they said. "You're too expensive," they said. The words echoed, absurd, almost comical in their cold detachment. I wanted to laugh, bitterly, at the irony, but the laughter stuck in my throat. Instead, I walked out, into the crisp air outside, letting it hit me like a physical force, cold and sharp, cutting through the numbness that had started to settle in. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. Their faces, calm and professional. The way HR's voice had been perfectly steady, like they had said this hundreds of times before. And yet, in that moment, It had felt like the ground beneath me was ripped away. I remembered gripping the edge of the desk, wishing, hoping, that this was some cruel dream I'd wake up from. But it wasn't. As I trudged toward my car, every familiar street, every traffic light, every sound felt different. The world I had known, the office, my routine, my sense of control, was gone. The city hummed around me, alive and indifferent, while I carried a box that suddenly felt symbolic of everything I'd lost. By the time I reached home, I was empty. The walls of my apartment felt too close, the silence too loud. I dropped the box on the floor and sank onto the couch, letting myself finally breathe. My thoughts were a messy tangle: anger, disbelief, humiliation, confusion. I had questions I didn't yet know how to ask. I had fears I couldn't yet name. And underneath it all, a tiny, stubborn spark of realization, one that I hadn't yet allowed myself to fully acknowledge. This wasn't just unfair. It was a mistake they were about to regret. I spent the evening staring at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over like some relentless film. The box of my belongings sat in the corner, a silent monument to everything I thought I'd built, everything I thought I controlled, and now, everything they thought they could take from me. I couldn't sleep. My mind was too loud, too insistent. I thought about the years I'd poured into that company, the late nights troubleshooting problems no one else could fix, the countless small victories that had kept the operation running like clockwork. Every system I touched, every crisis I averted, had been underpinned by one simple truth: I held the only operating license. Nobody else could legally run what I ran. Nobody. And yet, in a single meeting, all of that experience, all of that expertise, had been dismissed with a perfunctory, cost-cutting explanation that I found myself gritting my teeth, feeling the heat rise in my chest. Not just anger, but disbelief. How could they not see what was so obvious? It was like they had fired gravity itself, expecting the world to float on air. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my laptop, not to escape into distractions, but to examine the contracts, the policies, the clauses that might back up my unspoken leverage. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, tapping out thoughts I wasn't ready to voice out loud. You can't do this without me. They need me more than I need them. Flashbacks started creeping in, uninvited but sharp. I remembered staying late on nights nobody else cared, solving a problem that could have cost the company millions, quietly celebrating small wins at my desk. I remembered the pride in those moments, the feeling of being indispensable, untouchable. And now? Now it felt like a cruel joke, a twisted irony that left my stomach in knots. And then, slowly, a different feeling started to take shape, mingling with the anger. A cautious spark of strategy. I wasn't powerless. They had made a mistake, a monumental one, and I had something no one else did. That operating license wasn't just a credential. It was a ticket back to leverage, to control, to vindication. The realization made my pulse quicken. This wasn't just about being fired. This was about being underestimated, dismissed, and I wasn't going to let that slide. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the dim glow of the screen, letting the quiet hum of my apartment fill the space. The anger settled into something sharper, more precise. I could almost hear it, the whispered thought that had been lurking under the shock and numbness. They're going to regret this. Not in some vengeful way, but in the clear, undeniable way that comes when someone finally realizes their mistake and knows exactly how to turn it to their advantage. That I took a deep breath, letting the realization sink in. The calm, confident version of me, the one that had felt untouchable, wasn't gone. She was still there, smoldering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to step forward. And now, for the first time since that meeting, I felt a flicker of control returning. By the next morning, the fog of disbelief had lifted just enough to let me think clearly. Not calmly, never calmly, but with a focus sharpened by indignation and necessity. I sat at my desk at home, laptop open, papers scattered, coffee cooling beside me. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, and more importantly, how I could turn it in my favor. I started by reviewing the contracts, the policies, and the emails that had led up to my termination. Each line I read was like peeling back a layer of the company's confidence in me and realizing just how dependent they were on something only I could provide. My hands trembled as I traced the words of my operating license, the fine print that made it clear. Without me, the business couldn't legally function. A spark of cautious satisfaction flickered. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as they thought. Late night. Flashbacks blended into my research. I remembered moments when my presence had been the silent backbone of operations. Emergency calls at odd hours, software hiccups I resolved while everyone else panicked, regulatory deadlines I handled single-handedly. These weren't just memories, they were proof. Proof that I was indispensable. And now, for the first time, I began to see that leverage not as arrogance, but as reality. That I scribbled notes, mapping out possibilities. Phone calls, meetings, conversations. I started crafting a mental strategy. Every detail mattered. Who needed to know what, when, and how. The plan wasn't about revenge. It was about setting the record straight and reclaiming what was mine by right. The thought of confronting them, finally showing them the consequences of underestimating me, sent a thrill through my chest, a mixture of anticipation and restrained fury. The apartment felt quieter than usual, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant city traffic outside, even the faint ticking of the wall clock, all seemed amplified in this moment of intense focus. I could feel the tension coiling in my shoulders, the quiet pulse of determination in my veins. This wasn't just about them, or even about the job. It was about my worth, my expertise, and the validation I was owed. That I leaned back, letting the thoughts settle for a brief moment. A calm smile crept over my face. Not the easy grin of someone who thinks everything is fine, but the sharp, calculating one of someone who knows they have the upper hand, even if the world hasn't noticed it yet. The simmering anger from the previous days had shifted, transformed into something more potent. Clarity. For the first time since they told me I was expendable, I felt a measure of control returning. I wasn't powerless. Not really. I had the knowledge, the license, and the experience, things no one else could replicate. And if I played my cards right, I could make sure they realized that fact before it was too late. That I walked into the office that day feeling the weight of every late night, every missed weekend, every single moment I'd spent keeping this place afloat. The familiar hum of computers and low chatter felt different now, charged, like the calm before a storm. I had rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd position myself, but deep down, I knew the truth didn't need rehearsing. The truth had always been on my side. The HR's receptionist barely glanced up. The hallway felt longer than ever, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare on polished floors. Every step echoed, each one reminding me that I wasn't just walking into a building. I was walking into a reckoning. My pulse pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation, a tight coil of focus and restrained satisfaction. That I found myself in the familiar conference room, the same one where my termination had been delivered. This time, I didn't sit nervously. I stood tall, letting them sense that I was no longer the person they thought they could dismiss so easily. Their faces registered surprise before any words were spoken. The micro-expressions of people realizing the tables had turned. That I began calmly, deliberately. I didn't yell, I didn't plead. I reminded them of the projects I'd managed, the crises I'd resolved, the systems only I was certified to operate. Each fact landed like a small hammer, and I could see comprehension dawning in their eyes. Subtle disbelief flickered, followed by the slow, creeping panic that I had anticipated. Without me, I said, letting my voice stay measured, almost casual, operations can't run legally. The license is mine. You know that. I assume you've realized it by now. I let the words hang in the air, letting the room absorb them fully. There was no theatrics, just the cold weight of undeniable truth. Flashbacks flared briefly, late nights troubleshooting alone, phone calls at 2 in the morning, the times I had quietly saved the company millions. All those invisible victories suddenly became my shield and my sword. I could almost hear the thought forming in their minds. We can't function without them. And it felt good. No, it felt necessary. To let them feel it. That I maintained eye contact as their voices grew softer, questions fumbling, explanations dissolving. The arrogance of their earlier decision seemed ridiculous now, almost surreal. And in that quiet, tense room, a subtle, almost wicked satisfaction crept over me. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, and now they were the ones scrambling. I didn't need to shout or make threats. I just let the reality of my value, and their error, speak for itself. A thin, almost imperceptible smile tugged at my lips as I realized the shift was complete. For once, I was in control. They weren't just seeing me, they were seeing what they had ignored, what they had tried to discard. By the time I left that room, the air felt different, charged, lighter, victorious. The quiet hum of the office was no longer intimidating. It was a stage on which my worth had finally been recognized, whether they liked it or not. I'd walked in the underdog, underestimated and dismissed. I left not just vindicated, but undeniable. The fallout started almost immediately. It was subtle at first, an extra phone call here, a tentative email there. But soon, the urgency became impossible to ignore. I could sense the scramble before I even stepped into the office the next day. Colleagues whispered in corners, casting nervous glances my way. Supervisors hovered near desks, their smiles tight and strained, their usual confidence replaced with a jittery, half-hidden panic that I watched it all unfold quietly, like a spectator, in someone else's chaos. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who had dismissed me, deemed me expendable, were now realizing that the heartbeat of operations was tied entirely to me. Every missed step, every urgent question, every frantic phone call was a reminder of a truth they had refused to acknowledge. I was indispensable. Emails poured in, meetings were scheduled in a frenzy, and requests came from departments that had never reached out before. They were polite, almost too polite, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. They needed me, and they needed me fast. The same office that had felt cold and indifferent only a week ago now buzzed with the anxious energy of people suddenly aware of their own mistakes. Flashbacks bubbled up unbidden. I remembered moments when I had stayed late to fix an emergency, covered for someone else's oversight, or handled crises single-handedly. Back then, I had seen these victories as part of the job, a quiet fulfillment. Now, looking at the chaos unfolding around me, I realized how those same moments had been quietly cementing my leverage, my unspoken power. The recognition of it made a thrill run through me. Despite the scramble, I stayed calm. I didn't need to assert myself aggressively. My presence alone shifted the room's energy. People were already reacting to me, realizing my value without my having to declare it. I allowed myself a moment to savor the quiet satisfaction, the vindication of being seen, not just superficially, but in a way that was undeniable. By mid-afternoon, the mood in the office had changed completely. Where there had been casual confidence before, now there was careful respect, even deference. The same managers who had dismissed me now sought my input with a speed and intensity that bordered on desperation. I couldn't help but think, with a mix of amusement and relief. This was exactly the recognition I had been owed. Sitting at my desk, observing the controlled chaos, I felt a sense of quiet power I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't about arrogance, it was about truth. They had misjudged me, underestimated me, and now they were learning the consequences. And for once, I was able to witness it without fear, without anger, just clarity, calm, and a quiet, hard-earned satisfaction. By the time the office chaos settled into a new rhythm, I found myself staring out the window, letting the city blur into a mosaic of lights and movement. The adrenaline had faded, leaving space for reflection, a quiet, honest look at what had just happened, and at what I had learned. That IT hit me how easily I had taken my own worth for granted. I had assumed that my skills, my dedication, my unique license would protect me automatically. But I'd been reminded in the harshest way that recognition is never guaranteed, and that even the people who rely on you most can overlook your value when it suits them. It was humbling, but in a sharp, necessary way. That I thought about the anger and disbelief I'd felt, and I realized those emotions had served their purpose. They had sharpened my focus, clarified my priorities, and forced me to confront not just the company's errors, but my own assumptions. Flashbacks came unbidden. Late nights alone in the office, quiet victories nobody saw, crises I had averted while smiling through exhaustion. I could see now that those experiences hadn't just made me indispensable, they had made me resilient. They had made me capable of weathering this storm. There was also gratitude, subtle but profound. Gratitude for the hard lessons, for the reminder that self-worth isn't defined by recognition, but by the value you know you bring and the integrity with which you bring it. I had been blindsided, yes, but I had emerged not just intact, but wiser, more aware, and more confident in my abilities. That I smiled faintly, thinking about the irony. The very thing that had been used to dismiss me, the idea that I was expendable, had ultimately forced me to see my own strength in a way I might never have otherwise. I had been tested, underestimated, and in the process, I had learned the subtle art of standing firm without aggression, of letting truth and competence speak louder than words. The lesson was simple but powerful. Never assume you are invisible. Never undervalue your own expertise, and never let the fear of being dismissed silence the quiet confidence that has always been your foundation. I could feel a calm sense of empowerment settling over me, a reassurance that I wasn't just surviving, I was growing, and that growth would carry me forward far beyond any one office, any one company, or any one mistake. That I leaned back in my chair, letting the hum of the office fill the space around me. Everything felt sharper now, the small victories, the challenges, the subtle lessons embedded in moments of crisis. I wasn't just reflecting, I was integrating, letting the experience shape me in ways that weren't always comfortable, but were undeniably valuable. By the time I left the office that day, a strange calm had settled over me. The chaos of the past week felt like a storm I had walked through, and now I was on the other side, soaking in the quiet after the upheaval. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. That I thought about what had happened, about how easily the company had dismissed me, and about how quickly everything had flipped when they realized my value. And yet, I didn't feel bitterness anymore. That raw anger had transformed into something steadier, clarity, resilience, and a quiet confidence that no one could take from me. I had seen my own worth, not because someone else acknowledged it, but because I had experienced it firsthand, and refused to ignore it. I walked through the office one last time that evening, nodding to colleagues whose nervous glances had replaced their earlier indifference. The familiar hum of computers, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, the soft chatter of coworkers, it all felt different now. Not oppressive, not comforting, just alive. I realized that this was my world, my life, and I was no longer defined by someone else's misjudgment. Flashbacks of the past week played in my mind, not as painful reminders, but as lessons etched in clarity. I had been shocked, humiliated, frustrated, and scared, but I had also learned, grown, and ultimately reclaimed control. That realization was empowering. It meant I could face uncertainty with steady hands, navigate challenges with confidence, and protect the value I had worked so hard to cultivate. Looking forward, I didn't know exactly what would happen next. Maybe I'd stay with the company, under a new understanding. Maybe I'd pursue other opportunities. The details didn't matter as much as the truth I had uncovered. I was capable, indispensable in ways that counted, and resilient beyond what I had imagined. I could create boundaries, demand respect, and navigate the professional world with eyes wide open. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp evening air outside the office, the city alive and buzzing around me. I smiled faintly, thinking about the strange mix of irony and satisfaction in this journey. I had been fired, dismissed, underestimated, and yet I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more certain of my path than ever before. This was more than recovery. It was reclamation. It was the quiet joy of knowing that I could face whatever came next with integrity, intelligence, and unshakable self-respect. And for the first time in days, I felt truly free.